and welcome to My Podcast Knows What You Read in the Dark, a book club podcast made by chaotic people for chaotic people. I'm Kristen.
I'm Lady.
I'm Caitlin.
And I'm B.
And we are four friends here to tell you what's what about the books we read and loved this month, or the books we hated this month. So Lady, I think you said you had something you want to talk to us about?
Yes, so usually we don't tell each other what the books that we're going to talk about are, but I happen to know what Kristen's book is, and I know my book is also part of a series, and I'm wondering, what do you guys think is the perfect length for a series? Do you prefer, like, standalones, or do you prefer, like, a longer, like, series, like Throne of Glass or something?
I refuse to read a series that is longer than 4 books. I will make exceptions to it sometimes, depending on how captivating the series really is. But most of the time, I just don't have the energy to devote to anything longer than that. And especially if you're writing, like, really long books, nobody has the patience for that. That was really where I, like, kind of broke up with Sarah J. Maas, is when I read the Throne of Glass series, and each book was progressively longer, and there's, like, 9 of them? I was like, no, this is not for me. I am too old, and there are too many books for me to be reading 9-book series. So usually 4 is my limit.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like, I'm usually like a trilogy gal. I'll read books with 4, but I mean, you have to like really have my attention. If it gets any longer than that, like, I feel like it's really long-winded. You need to just tone it down a little bit. You've went on too long.
What about you, B?
Probably the series that I have most like are ones that typically can achieve what it wants to achieve within 3 to 4 books. That being said, there are some series that I have followed and read through. Like Jim Butcher has a Codex Alera series that I think is like 7 or 8, but it fit with the journey of the character to go through that many books. I will admit, before it was ever a TV show, that someone recommended Outlander to me. I did, enjoy it, and I've read through that whole series. But for the most part, I really want a series to accomplish what it needs to accomplish within like 3 to 4. I feel like, I don't know if this is a record for how soon we're going to mention it, but like I'm looking at you, Holly Black, with like modern Fairytales and the Book of the Air.
Always!
It's a goal of mine to just mention Holly Black in every single one of our episodes.
When we talk about her, we are coming home. That's our safe place.
Yes.
It is. We love you, Holly.
Lady, what about you?
Yeah, it's the same for me. I prefer, like, trilogies or, like, 4 books, tops. I have read the whole Throne of Glass series and I enjoyed it, but I much prefer, like, a good trilogy.
Yeah, I would never, like, say that it's necessarily bad. Like, the Throne of Glass series isn't bad, but it's just, like, at one point, you're like, okay, how many times can we do this same thing in a book before it gets old?
So sometimes I see, like, fan art of the early
Oh my god.
Throne of Glass book, and I have no, like, I don't know how we got from there to the end of
Oh
it.
my god. And the first Throne of Glass book is not long, by any means, and then compared to Kingdom of Ash is the last one. I can't remember all of a sudden.
Yes, it's like 1,000 pages.
It's 1,000 pages. 1,000 pages.
There's no need for that. There's no need.
No.
You're on the 9th book, and it still took you 1,000 pages to tell this story? No.
We didn't get the sex scene we wanted.
No.
I was like, and still
I'm just
people
saying.
complain about a fade to black.
Yeah.
Like, come on.
I'm gonna complain about the Elorcan
Yep.
missing sex scene.
I'll complain about that until I die.
It's unacceptable.
Whenever I read that book, I started off, reading as you would normally, page 1, 2, 3, whatever, and then I just got so tired of all the storylines that I ended up finding a post on Tumblr where somebody had painstakingly, and God bless this person, I wish I could remember what their URL is,
Our hero.
painstakingly went through and marked the chapters and pages with the different couples' interactions in the book, so you could skip around to find your couples. So I was like, all right, where's all the Minorian stuff? Where's all the Alorcan stuff? Everything else in the trash.
And so what's interesting for me is like that book series versus there's this book series that my spouse has started and has been waiting for the third book to come out, and it's The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss.
Oh, yes.
Right? And so he's wanted me to read Name of the Wind, and I just haven't gotten around to it. But so there's 2 of the 3 planned books in the trilogy. It's such good writing that people are willing to wait, and it has been over 10 years. And again, the writing is so good, and people know that if he's going to get it done, he's going to get it done in that third book, that the publisher even is like, okay, Mr. Rothfuss, we know you'll get it. And that's the difference is it's well written and it's going to complete what it needs to complete in a trilogy, as opposed to having to keep extending into bigger and longer novels for 7 books to be able to finish the whole storyline. And I mean, almost at that point, because you do have so much bloat to your story, you're definitely just going to leave people unhappy, especially if you skip a sex scene for Lorcan in Lady's case.
Yes.
I'll never forgive her for that.
I know I'm not the only one who's upset about, and Lorcan did.
You're not the only one on this podcast upset about that. Well, speaking of series, Kristen, you want to tell us about what you read this month?
I do, and buckle up because I am about to be unhinged for the next 20 minutes.
Yes.
I'm going to talk about a book series that I'm very well known to be obsessive about. So much so that I'm known as a cult leader in the book club, because as soon as people join, I'm like, have you read this? I'm going to mostly talk about the first book today, just because that's the most important one to get started. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the series as a whole, just to convince our listeners at home that you need to pick this up and read it. And the God tier book that I'm referring to is Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. I think everyone has read this book, right?
Yes.
I read the first book, but I haven't finished the series.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Kristen read it. I remember exactly because I was super, super sick when Kristen was reading it. And I thought it was COVID. It wasn't, but I was still out of work for almost a week with whatever mystery illness I had. And Kristen recommended this book series to me while she was in the process of reading it. So it was August of 2021 that she read these books. And she was like, Caitlin, you should read this. I think you'd really like it. And I felt really bad because I was homesick, so I had nothing else to do. I blew through the series within 3 days. And Kristen was like, I recommended this series to you, and you just bypassed me and read straight through without waiting for me.
Yeah, I mean, she read the whole series in 4 days, and I'm still reading the second one, trying to keep up because I'm still at work. And then I also traveled in the middle of reading this series, so I wasn't getting to read as much as I normally would have, and it was crazy. But yeah, so Stalking Jack the Ripper, our narrator is Audrey Rose Wadsworth, and this book is told entirely in her point of view. This takes place in the late 1800s. The first book is in 1888. And in the first book, she's apprenticing under her uncle in his forensic science lab, examining cadavers, much to her father and family's dismay. As you can imagine, again, this is in the 1800s. So, women did not take part in stuff like this. And Audrey Rose is a really wonderful main character because of how she knows that what she's doing is frowned upon, but she does it anyway and doesn't feel any regrets towards that. And there are times where she kind of is like, is it a little bit morbid that I really enjoy science and love to look at dead bodies and love to kind of figure out what happened to them, that made them die. But then at the same time, she realizes that it's important to have this science and to understand how people pass away and how you can read their bodies after death and know exactly what happened to them. And I just think it's really cool that she's a character who is desperate to learn and she loves it. She's very into reading and science and studying, and the whole series kind of revolves around that and her wanting to get better at what she does and, not willing to sacrifice for that. She makes it very clear to a lot of the people in this series that what she wants is this. It's not going to be taken away from her, and she's not less than just because she's a woman. And I really, really like that about her.
One thing I really like about her is a lot of the times when you do have a character like that who is more progressive for the time period that they're set in, they are a complete radical, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But she's not getting herself into these wacky situations because she can't control herself, she's a product of her time, but she's also somebody who's progressive. It's just a really unique way to write a character like that.
It is. And like I was going to say too, you know, she is a well-to-do woman in the 1800s. She's about to come out to society and like her family has lots of money. So she, you know, she has like all of these societal pressures and stuff. And she likes, you know, to wear pretty dresses and she likes to go to balls and stuff like that. And like she lets that exist outside of her other personality, I guess you should say. But they kind of also come together. Like you said, she's not a radical, but she is. Like, it just kind of depends on the way she's looking at it. And she makes a lot of comments throughout the series about how, like, wow, if society knew this about me, they would turn their nose up at me more than they do already because of the kind of job that I do. She kind of doesn't care, but also does care. She walks a fine line between caring about what society thinks and what they don't think.
But one person does not mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we are about to get into him, baby.
Well, hold up. But I was going to say, when you're talking about the fact that you are trying to have this character that is progressive in the setting where, like, typically she would not be allowed to be progressive, like, it's just a good reminder. When you think about history, it's so easy to fall into the trap of like, oh, well, this is how things were. Like, people weren't progressive. And it was like, there was always resistance to the status quo of certain types of treatments.
Yes.
And so it is, I think, also helpful to have fiction being able to say that, right? That there are people who are progressively minded throughout history, regardless of the circumstances.
Yeah, like not every rebellion or like rebellious person is an all-out rebel. Like, it's like these small things that she does, like her interest in forensic science. But she still, like, you know, talks about how she likes the fashion of the time and that kind of thing. Like, those people exist both in history and in the present. She's very relatable in that way of, like, she understands that some things about her world are really screwed up and, like, they shouldn't be that way, like the way women are treated, but also, like, she understands societal manners and expectations of, like, propriety and that kind of thing. And it's just very relatable as a character of, like, it makes her really complex.
It does.
Dynamic, right?
Yeah, very, very dynamic.
Sure, she likes to dissect dead people, but she also likes to wear dresses.
Right, right.
Yeah, you want dynamic people. You want dynamic characters because it is, like Caitlin was saying, like, it's relatable.
Right. So when the book starts, Audrey Rose is trying to convince her uncle to let her study in one of his classes that he teaches, so she can learn a bit more in her apprenticeship. And typically women aren't allowed at these things. So he's like, you know, you can come, but you need to dress up as a man and you need to not speak because you're really not supposed to be here and it's unbecoming of a woman and blah, blah, blah. And this is where we meet the real star of this entire series.
The love of my life.
And then it's Thomas Cresswell.
The man of all time.
Yes.
This man, he ruined every other fictional man for me. He is it. He is mine. He is everything I've ever wanted.
He is everything everyone should want to be.
Yes.
He is. He's sarcastic. He's annoyingly charming.
Can we just talk about Thomas Cresswell for the next hour?
Sure.
You act like I haven't written paragraphs about this man. Like, whenever I was sitting here trying to think of like how I could narrow down what I was going to say about him, it was like so difficult because he is such a complex character in the way that Audrey Rose is, but in different ways. He is such a dynamic character in like the way that he interacts with other people versus Audrey Rose. He's like sarcastic, but he's also charming. He's like filthy minded, but he's also proper, like when the time calls for it. We talked about this about another book, but he is absolutely whipped from the minute he meets Audrey Rose. He is so deeply infatuated with her from the moment that he lays eyes on her. And it is just like absolutely wonderful.
I don't know if you mentioned it, but he like immediately recognizes her as a woman in that class. Like all the other boys are stupid and completely fooled, and he like clocks her instantly.
Oh yeah, he immediately notices that she's a girl. He is like the equivalent of a human, like a chef kiss.
Yeah.
Everything that you've ever wanted in a man, like he's that. He has no filter. He's like painfully honest. Absolutely brilliant. The man like thinks of mathematical equations in his head so that he doesn't like want to jump Audrey Rose at every available moment. It's just like, it's so funny, like, to think about throughout this first book, and actually most of the second one, Audrey Rose is trying to convince herself that she's not completely head over heels in love with him, which is just funny because no one is introduced to Thomas Cresswell and is not helpless in their feelings for him.
He got us, so.
I ended up like skimming through the book instead of taking my own notes about my book. And like, there are several times where Audrey Rose makes comments like, oh, he doesn't mean it.
He's such a rake.
And I'm like, girl, you're so dense. Are you serious right now? There's a part where she's like, careful, someone might hear you. They might think you're beginning to care for me. And he's like, yeah, I think that person would be really smart. And she literally is like, oh, he's lying. No.
And she's like, oh, what a liar he is. And I'm like, Audrey Rose, open your eyeballs. Like, open your ears.
And she stays this dumb for the whole series, but we love her.
We love her.
Yes. And I haven't really mentioned it, I don't think, but like, when you first meet Thomas, like, he's very kind of closed off. Audrey Rose describes him as cold and cruel, but it's kind of described later on that he's just someone who feels incredibly deeply. And so in a way to not get himself hurt, he tends to hide his emotions away. And despite him being this kind of person, he still says some of the most gorgeous things that I've ever read on a page.
It's frankly disgusting.
It is disgusting.
It's unfair.
I just finished rereading Hunting Prince Dracula, which is the second book, which is probably my favorite one, honestly. But there's a part very early where Audrey Rose jokes with Thomas and she's like, oh, what would I do without you? And she's being sarcastic. I don't remember exactly the context. And he says something like, you would miss me terribly and know it, just as I would miss you in ways I cannot fathom should we ever part. Which, first of all, wow.
My baby boy.
Thomas, we're joking. Bring it down.
Yeah, like, we're being sarcastic. You're out here, like, delivering soliloquies. But anyways, then Audrey Rose thinks to herself that his confessions are often so matter of fact that it stuns her every time he makes them. And it's the truth. Like, the way that he speaks to her, like, she's delicate, but then he'll also bring her up in times of darkness and makes it known, like, how strong he thinks that she is and how wonderful she is. Like, it's beautiful. And, like, I've said it before, like, in other contexts, but Kerri Maniscalco, like, she knows how to write a fictional man in, like, a way that I've never been able to understand. Like, Thomas Cresswell is one, if you've ever read Kingdom of the Wicked series, like, all the men in that series are absolutely perfect, too. But, you know, we'll talk about them another time. We're on Thomas Cresswell lockdown. I could talk about him all day long, and I'll refrain.
No, it's okay. Let's do it.
Yeah, why not?
I really could.
This is the Thomas Cresswell Power Hour.
Literally. Like, maybe we'll have a bonus episode where we just talk about all the ridiculous things he says.
Just an episode that's top 10 best Sims.
Oh, God. Yes. Anyway, so the first book, after Audrey Rose goes to this class and she meets Thomas, they end up meeting again later at her uncle's lab, and they're examining a body that's been killed by who the Whitechapel papers are calling a murderer named Leather Apron. And this was actually the very early name for Jack the Ripper before he actually began writing letters to the papers and he declared his own name. And so this entire book revolves around the both of them trying to discover who Jack the Ripper is. So they're kind of following clues, examining his victims as they come up. As the namesake goes, they actually start stalking people around Whitechapel and trying to figure out who they think Jack the Ripper might be. And while all this is going on, they're also dancing around their feelings for each other. And Audrey Rose is like, I don't like him. Meanwhile, Thomas is like, this woman is going to be my wife. Stupidly enough, I actually saw this book on Book Talk, which this is one of the few books that I've not been led astray. And this book was recommended in an enemies to lovers category, which this book is not enemies to lovers. And if you think that it is, and that's why you want to read this, it's not.
I didn't know that you had seen this on Book Talk.
Yeah, I did. I had seen it, and I had went to a thrift store that is around where I live, and I actually found a copy of this book, an autographed copy, at the thrift store. And I was like, you know what? I've been wanting to read this, so I'll pick it up. But yeah, it was on an enemies to lovers recommendation. Like I said, this is not enemies to lovers. If you want to call it anything, I guess you can consider it rivals to lovers, but it's not even really that.
It's one-sided.
Thomas never once considered.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one-sided rivals.
It's rivals, and then it's best friends to lovers.
Yeah.
Yeah, eventually this is a friends to lovers story. And kind of similar to the book that Caitlin talked about in the last episode, I figured out who Jack the Ripper was pretty early. I would say I knew before even hit a halfway point. But I still really loved the mystery of this book because I did find myself doubting who I thought Jack the Ripper was
Yes,
and wondering if
same.
I was wrong. And it's like Caitlin said with her book too, I was also wondering why and to what end would this person want to start murdering all of these women around Whitechapel in London. And so while I did know pretty early on who it was still really interesting. And when I got to the end of it, I didn't feel like let down or anything. I mean, it's still like a shocking surprise when it's revealed who it is.
Yeah, I guessed pretty early on who it was, but the reason behind it, I could not have guessed.
Yeah.
Oh, no, me neither. I had no idea where the end of this book was actually going to go. And I will say, if you pick this up and you read the rest of them, I did not know who the killer was in any of the rest of the books except for the last one. And I think I just got lucky on the last one. But the middle two, I had no clue
Yeah, same.
who it was going to be.
Honestly, don't even remember for the third one.
The second book, I was so sure that I was right, that I knew who it was. I stuck to my guns so hard through the second book, and I could not have been more wrong.
Same.
I was so embarrassed.
Yeah, it definitely comes out of nowhere. In a good way. You're not, whenever the pieces come together, you're like, oh, well, that makes sense. But like I said, there's plenty of leads to go on in the first one. So, there's a lot of different paths they take, and Audrey, Rose, and Thomas go down each one of them as the murders start piling up. And, while you're trying to uncover this mystery, you have this beautiful romance happening, and then becoming closer as we've said it, they really are best friends before they are lovers of any kind of sort. Even as the books go on, they are friends first and they are partners second. And I think that's really, really beautiful because I think that's what a lot of people look for in their relationships anyways.
Yes, they're equals.
Yes, lady, they are equals. And it's so nice. They reiterate it so many times. So, you do not ever question that they are equals. I'm pretty sure in multiple instances in every book, they talk about how they are equals. It's great.
It is. I really, really love it. So there's one part that I want to read from actually a novella that is Becoming the Dark Prince, which is arguably the best part of this entire series because it's told from Thomas's point of view.
I just want her to write an entire book of Thomas's point of view.
Me too, because this is actually where you learn that he does mathematical equations in his head so that he doesn't want to make out with Audrey Rose.
Such a mood. Nothing is a boner killer quite like math.
Right? But there's a part where Thomas is talking to another man who I will not name because it will give away spoiler for the third book, which is Escaping from Houdini.
The love of my life.
Yeah, well, we will agree to disagree on this.
I'm an apologist. I love him so much.
I like him too.
You will either love him or hate him. I can't stand him, but...
He is a charismatic, chaotic shit starter, pretty boy with a penchant for drama. He was baked in the Caitlin Easy Bake Oven mold.
I know, but I still hate him.
Such a piece of shit. I love him.
I know, I love him so much.
Anyways, there's this line where Thomas is talking about Audrey Rose and they're kind of going back and forth, and the other man says, "Don't you ever tire of being so admirable? It's such a boring way to live, rushing around, saving damsels in distress." And then Thomas says, if you think doing the admirable thing is easy, you're more naive than I thought. And then
Snaps.
This part is what is so good to me. He's like, I fight against my innate selfishness because I love her. I want to be better, not just for her, but also for me. I want to be the sort of man who earns her trust and love and then works to keep it by growing into an even better person.
Ooh,
Beautiful.
Take my heart already.
Magnificent. But also the quote that you picked for the other dude is so indicative of why I love him.
I know.
Don't you ever get tired of doing the right thing? Yes, all the time.
Shortly after this, he says, and Audrey Rose says this, I think in Hunting Prince Dracula to her dad, but Thomas kind of repeats this and he's like, she hardly requires a knight to save her. She's more likely to ride in and save you and then smack you for being an idiot. And if that doesn't describe
Yes.
their whole dynamic, I don't know kind of what does. Even in Stalking Jack the Ripper, there's a part where Audrey saves Thomas from an attacker, and she's like, how scandalous, like, that you're gonna have to tell everybody that a woman saved you. And he's like, anytime I can tell them, I will.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, he is like on the Audrey Rose train 24/7, and we're just along for the ride. And so I can't really talk anymore about the book because I'll give away like basically what happens. And the entire premise of it revolves around the murders of Jack the Ripper. I will say that the biggest complaint that I've seen about this book is that there are some historical inaccuracies, mostly with dates, and there's some names left out. But there's an author's note at the end of the book where Kerri talks about how, like, she took some creative liberties to better make the book flow because introducing a lot of names that weren't going to be relevant would kind of derail the story. And, like, she wanted to make the book flow a little bit better, especially in regards to dates, because if she moved things too quickly, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. And so if that's something that's going to, like, bother you, I guess I should say, like, you may not like it, but I didn't know a whole lot about this case going in, so some of that stuff didn't really bother me. And also, I can look over that stuff because I understand where Kerri's coming from. Like, you can't introduce a whole lot of random information because it is going to pull people out of the story. And that happens a lot with this series just because, you can't make everything extremely accurate. Like, I mean, you could, but it may end up, not making the story flow very well. So that's not your thing. This book may annoy you, but it doesn't bother me. I think it's fine. And everything's explained at the end, and she references everything that she changed and why she did it. She even goes into like a lot of detail about the actual victims of this crime and all the crimes that she talks about later. And also, there's a lot of, if you buy the physical copies of these books, and maybe even the ebooks, I'm not really sure, there's a lot of really cool artifacts put in. Like, she actually put the real, like, photocopies of the Jack the Ripper letters.
Yes, there's like illustrations. It's so cool.
Yeah, they're in the ebooks too.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure. I thought that was really cool that she put that stuff in there because I'm a sucker for stuff like that. So I feel like I talked more about the characters in the actual plot of this book, but I'm going to spoil it if I tell you too much about it.
The title is pretty self-explanatory. They go stalking Jack the Ripper. There you go.
They do. Yeah, and like I said, there's 4 books in this series plus a novella.
I've said it before, but I've never planned on reading this book because of the title of it.
Yeah.
The title and the cover.
I hate the title.
It feels like baiting.
The title is so, like, edgy.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I've always thought it was kind of cringe. And so when Kristen started talking about how great it was, then I read it. But, like, otherwise I would never have read this book.
Yeah, I was the same way.
Just because the title is just like, ugh.
I kept seeing it pop up in, like, all these different lists. It was just in my orbit constantly. And I was like, no, the covers are cringy. This title is terrible. And then Kristen read it. Thankfully. I thank you.
Our savior.
Yeah, our savior.
You're a prophet.
We're starting a new religion, and it is centered around Thomas Cresswell, and Kristen is our prophet.
Yes.
I mean, I worship him, so it's only natural that I spread the good word and let everyone know to follow him. So yeah, so that was my book. I know we talked about how the first time I ever read it was in 2021, but I've been doing a re-listen right now with the audiobooks, and I would highly recommend them. The narrator is wonderful, and the way that she reads Thomas is like perfect. Like, she gets his like cocky attitude so well. And yeah, so I would recommend those also. But I'm getting ready to start Escaping from Houdini tomorrow, and I'm not prepared.
Ready to suffer.
Yeah.
Please say hi to my man for me.
Yeah, I will push him off the boat.
It's not his fault.
I know. I talk a lot of crap about him, but at the end of it, I don't hate him as much as I do at the beginning, but I still get angry with him.
Kristen and I have, like, broken it down into all 4 of these books. Audrey Rose and Thomas have one brain cell between the two of them. And It does not exist in Stalking Jack the Ripper. They have no brain cells. Audrey has the brain cell in Hunting Prince Dracula. Thomas has the brain cell in Houdini. And then it's back to Audrey. And that's pretty much how it goes for the whole series.
It is. And then in Becoming the Dark Prince, Thomas still has it.
Yes. He retained it from Houdini.
He did. I will say, if you read this series, do not skip the novella. Read it immediately after.
It's the best. It's so good.
Yeah, it will help you recover from Houdini and is a great setup for...
It's like a Band-Aid.
It is.
It is. I even put that in my review of the book. I left a review of Escaping from Houdini that said something to the effect of, like, I can't believe that Kerri would do this to me. And then I read the novella and I went back and updated my review and be like, okay, I forgive you.
I think I wrote in my review of Becoming the Dark Prince that the best part about it was learning that Thomas is 6'1".
Oh my god, yes!
Yeah, which I was like, thank you for that little tidbit of information.
She did not have to include that at all.
She didn't. Like, we knew he was tall, but I just thought Audrey Rose was short. And then I found out that he's 6'1", and I'm like, wow.
To be fair, he could be a short king and he would still rock it.
Yeah, he would.
Oh, you're totally right. But yeah, so that was my book. I hope you join the cult.
Yeah,
Join us.
seriously. You're missing out.
Join us, B.
I was like, I was kind of holding back because I definitely got kicked out while reading it because I have training as a historian, and so there were times when I was like, that's not right! Like, in my head, kind of reading different things. And so I actually found it challenging to read because just some of the liberties taken with, like, some of the historical stuff, I was like, this is tough to read. And also, someone I know is doing research into how millennials are interested in serial killers and, like, glorifying murder. And it was just like, nope, not me. I am not one of those millennials that, like, wants to listen to true crime podcasts or, like watch Netflix, documentaries about serial killers. So Stalking Jack the Ripper already, I was like, it was just tough, like, content for me to read.
Thomas is worth it.
But part of it, I think, is that I do, like, struggle with how I need to take him at face value because, he is that direct. And I'm like, huh? People being outright and direct? Like, wait a minute. So it's like I know the limitations of my own bias. I remember as we were going through this, when we were doing the buddy read for it, lady, that, like, you blew through it. And I was like, yeah, I'll get there. And it just took me so long because I didn't dive in the same way.
You know what I think happened, though? We read this book at the end of 2021. And then at the same time, we read Captive Prince.
No, it really was, and I remember. I was remembering that.
I think
when we were
that's
thinking
what
about it. I was
happened.
like, why did I, like, struggle with this? And I was like, oh, because Captive Prince.
Because you had something on your palate.
Exactly. Like, we had this week off from school because of snow, and I was so sick. Literally, that's all I did. And I read, like, the whole series. I read the third book in Captive Prince again, and then all the short stories. Like, I literally could not get enough. And so then, for me, Stalking Jack the Ripper didn't mean as much. But as you're going through it, Kristen, I was like, I need to give it another go and reread it.
Captive Prince is the religion that I started and I'm the prophet of. I've ruined Aaliyah's life with that book, and I'm not sorry about it at all. And I have pushed it on so many people since then because I read that series in 2018, and it's so specific who you can really recommend that series to.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So for a very long time, I just sat on it alone.
Then you found us freaks.
Oh, you hadn't met us yet.
I hadn't. Yes. I did not have my people. I recommended it to Aaliyah, and she loved it. And I was like, okay, maybe I should be a little bit more liberal about recommending this to people because maybe more people like it than I think will. And then when we met, I was like, read this, read this, read this. And I shoved it at all of you. I was like, you have to read it, you have to read it. And I'm glad I did because everybody has joined my cult.
You found the right kind of freaks who will see a man whip another man almost to death and be like, yes, this is true love.
This is true love.
This peak romance.
Peak romance.
But B, I'm really glad that you brought up the serial killer fascination because that's another aspect of Audrey Rose's characterization that I really, really liked. Kerri does not write her like that.
Mm-mm.
Never once when Audrey Rose is doing some kind of forensic investigation. I mean, yes, in a scientific way, she talks about it being fascinating, like how the body works and how she can tell what has happened by looking at the body, but like she feels for the victims and talks about how difficult it is and how she does have to shut herself down to go to that scientific, like, analytical place. And I think that is a really good distinction that she made in her character of, like, Audrey Rose, yes, is someone who can do this job, this very hard, very important job, but it does affect her, and she does, like, have these feelings, and she's not just sitting here glorifying what's going on. She, like, is definitely understands the gravity of this kind of work.
Yeah, with her being in this career, like, she is definitely, like, in it for the victims. I mean, like, yes, she loves the science of it, and she thinks it's fascinating. But at the end of the day, she makes a point, like, we do this for the victims and for the victims' families.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, those portions of the books, that helped me get through it. You do have that, humanizing, compassionate part to it. I do plan to go back to it, but I wanted to do it when I wasn't bookending it from clearly something else.
Right. That makes sense. So, Lady, you said that you were doing a series too, so why don't you talk about that?
Yes, and I'm also doing a series set in the 1800s. But I don't know how you expect me to talk about this fictional man that I really love after talking about Thomas for 30 minutes. Like, I can't convince you that this man is perfect when we had Thomas right before.
He's a hard one to follow up on.
Well, okay, but this is so interesting for me, Lady, because, like, when I am in a reading slump, I end up reading, like, Regency or even just slightly historical fiction romances. And so when you mentioned that you were reading this, I was just like, come on, why did we not get to this?
Oh, I've mentioned it. You're gonna know exactly what I was reading. So, for Worn Page Library, I think in December we read Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater.
Yes.
This was the first book in her Regency Fairytales series. And today I have brought to you guys 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater, which is the second book in that series.
Oh, I'm excited.
my gosh. I just added this to one of my Worn Page Library challenges for the 20 for 23 the other day.
Nice.
Oh, nice.
I read the whole trilogy, and this one's by far my favorite one. So, it's about Effie. She's a chambermaid for the Ashbrook family. And as a maid, she's very angry, and, like, rightfully so. She's a maid for a family who treats her like garbage. And a lot of her problems, they're problems that, like, could also be familiar to us in the modern world, especially in this year of our Lord 2023. They are understaffed, they are overworked, and their employers have ridiculous expectations.
Yep, every day.
No comment.
Yeah, exactly. She has a lot of strong opinions about her employers, but her mother, she always taught her from a young age that getting angry doesn't solve anything. So she tries to calm herself with, like, singing, like, little nursery rhymes and stuff like that when she's really angry. And the book opens with Effie scrubbing the entrance to the house after someone trailed mud all over the floor.
Oh, no.
So she's, like, scrubbing and she's cursing them all in her head as she cleans, and then, like, she's singing under her breath, and someone walks in. It's the youngest brother of the family, a man named Benedict Ashbrook, and he's coming back from his trip to the continent. So Benedict is your usual rake. He's, like, handsome and flirtatious, but despite being such a rich dude, he takes off his shoes before entering the house.
Oh my god.
I know, right? And that's all Effie needs to declare herself to be in love with him.
Me too.
I know, right? Men doing the bare minimum.
You know that picture of James Corden where he's, like, wearing the wedding dress and, like, standing there smiling, like, yeah, that's me right now.
The man does the bare minimum and she's in love. So later that day, she's with her friend Lydia, and Lydia's complaining about all the extra work that they have to do because the household is organizing a ball for the next day. And Lydia kind of, like, she's, like, complaining, and she's just like, they want us to do all these things. And Effie just casually mentioned, like, oh, it's not that bad. Like, like, did you see that Benedict is back? And Lydia's like, yeah, what about it? Like, who cares? Effie's like, well, he's kind of nice to look at. And Effie's like, what the fuck? Like, what? Why do you mind about that all of a sudden? But anyway, like, Lydia's kind of like, oh, dreams, like, you can dream about things, you can fantasize about this guy, it doesn't matter. The next day, Effie is serving at the ball and she sees Benedict again. And Benedict does not recognize her because she's wearing her servant uniform and she's kind of like serving some cocktails or whatever. And servants, to him, they're not anything more than furnitures. And Effie kind of just basically like shakes her up and she realizes like, oh, this man that she falls in love with is kind of a little bit like all the others, right?
Right.
And so she gives her tray of like drinks that she was carrying to Lydia and she runs out of the ball to get some air and into the hedge maze at the back where she can cry in peace. And I realize that I'm making her sound like a little bit of a crybaby, like kind of like a little bit annoying. But honestly, like she's really not. I really liked her character. She like I kind of get it. Like she's stressed, she's overworked, so she's on edge, and therefore like this slight thing just sets her off.
I mean, you said this was relatable for 2023, so
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just like she's also had this like fantasy kind of built up in her head just in this short interaction because he's like the only person that was courteous during this time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just been shattered instantly. So yeah, that would be like kind of heartbreaking.
Even then, she does not like let go of him. That's still not enough for her to let go. Like, she still thinks that this guy was nice. She just thinks, oh, maybe he does not recognize me, right? So now she's in the edge maze, she's crying, and she's talking to herself, as one does. She's, like, kind of, like, talking about, like, oh, like, of course he wouldn't recognize me, and even if he did, it's not like he would dance with me or whatever. And then, as she's talking to herself, someone answers her, and in comes Lord Blackthorn. He's a fancily dressed gentleman who wears a rose instead of a cravat. And after her mistake with Benedict, Effie is like suspicious of his kindness. He seems like way too excited to meet her. And when she tells him that she's no more than a maid, like she's like just a maid, she's not a noble lady, like don't mind her, ignore her, he's even more delighted. He's kind of like, just like, oh, a maid, this is great. Cool, I've always wanted to meet a maid. And he asks her to dance.
Which, just like, because Lord Blackthorn makes a cameo at the end of the first book.
Yes.
That, like, this is absolutely in character. Like, based on the tiny cameo that you see.
There's a point in the book where Lord Blackthorn is talking about Lady Hollowvale from the previous book. And he's saying that Lady Hollowvale... It's 11 p.m. and you can tell. Lady Hollowvale says that most fairies are very wicked indeed by English standards. She also tells me that I am a pleasant aberration. He's kind of this weirdo, and he knows about it, but like at the same time, he's just being himself.
And he's okay with it.
Yeah, he's okay with it. He knows.
Let your freak flag fly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
As they dance, Lord Blackthorn proves himself to be even weirder. He asks her if she believes herself to be powerless, and obviously, like, that's a creepy thing to ask, so she obviously says no at first. She's like, no, I'm not powerless, like, I'm powerful and I could kick your ass, so don't even try anything, thank you very much. And then as they're dancing, and she realizes that he has pointy little ears, and that she's dancing with a fairy. I talk about that a lot with, like, once again, Holly Black, and the other book in this series. I also talked about this on the book club. Like, I'm very specific about what I like in my book fairies to be like. I like them wicked, I like them fucked up, and I like them when they're weird little creatures that don't act human at all.
Yes.
And Lord Blackthorn is, like, really a good example of this. He has a strange obsession with English virtue.
Mm-hmm.
Lady Hollowvale told him that to be a virtuous gentleman, he has to be kind to the powerless and cruel to the powerful. And so, therefore, by asking Effie if she's powerless, he was trying to figure out where she stands on that spectrum, so he can decide if he has to be kind to her or cruel to her. And so when he says that, she corrects herself and she says, oh, no, I'm a maid, I'm very powerless. And once again, like, he's delighted by that. He's just like, oh, great, you're powerless, I can help you, that's so cool.
So I really like that feature because, like, there's a lot of old school Irish tales about the Fae that involve manners and such. And it's just this, like, very distorted view in a lot of the stories of, like, manners and what they mean. And so, like, when you're saying that, and especially, like, his obsession with English virtue, and especially the delight, like, the kind of unbridled joy learning about a new feature of manners.
He just really wants to help her, and like through the book he's gonna try to help her, but he's gonna fuck everything up just because he's trying so hard to be helpful.
I also love that because there's like the like how literal do you take things?
Oh yeah, that's gonna come up.
Oh, excellent.
So immediately, like, Effie tells him like she's powerless, and he offers to help her. At first, she doesn't really accept. Like, it takes them a few unfortunate meetings where like they keep meeting, and she keeps having these like bad events happen to her. But eventually, they do strike a bargain, and the bargain is that he will turn her into a proper lady, and she has 101 days to quote marry the man she loves. In exchange for every minute that she spends as a lady, she has to add 1 embroidery stitch to his coat. Thus the title 10,000 Stitches.
Okay.
And so Effie and Lord Blackthorn, they start their quest to try and catch Benedict's attention because Effie believes that basically that's the man she loves and that's the man that she has to marry. And that basically this will solve all her problems in life. Yeah, but you can't imagine by how I described Lord Benedict that he is not the main love interest for this, and Lord Blackthorn is. And it's just so sweet. He's just trying his best, and he screws up all the time. And there's this recurring theme of anger, and just like rightful anger, that was also present in the first book. It's kind of why I like this one a lot more than I like the third book in this series. Like, this one deals with the same kind of, as I said, like rightful anger that the third book does not really deal with. I kind of read a little bit in the afterword because I wanted to see what the author had to say about that, and I wanted to see if it was like a thing that was actually something that she thought about. And basically, I'm not going to spoil the book, but there's a lot of talk of could like someone like Lord Blackthorn just magic away these like bad noble people and the way that they treat their servants, or would that just not solve anything? In the afterword, the author says, when villains mistreat us, they almost always shall continue to mistreat us until someone forcibly stops them. But if you are powerless, then it is almost impossible to stand up to your villains. This book deals a lot about, like, strength in numbers. Basically, if you have a team of servants, having one of them get out of that cycle doesn't really change anything for the other ones. You have to really have an uprising of some sort, of like a solidarity for them to actually get out of that cycle. Basically, the people in power will never be punished by the system. You have to break the system if you want to get out of it.
Right.
There's more of us than there are of them kind of mentality.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I don't want to spoil it. Read this book. I love Lord Blackthorn. He's adorable. I also do know that the author is from Montreal, so hi, neighbor.
Ah, that's so cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
I loved the first book. I thought it was so cute. So I would want to read the other ones too.
Yes, they're very good. Even though I didn't pick the third one for this episode, I still really liked it. And the relationship in the third book is a sapphic relationship.
Ooh.
Oh.
And I read the afterword for that one as well. And basically she talks about how a lot of sapphic relationships always end badly in books, or they're not happily ever after. But for these specific characters, specifically a trans woman and a cis woman in a sapphic relationship, she wanted them to have a happy life. She wanted them to be happy together at the end. I thought it was really lovely.
That is lovely. I love that.
Yeah, that's gorgeous. I also just I am a sucker for any kind of quote unquote historical fiction that incorporates some kind of magical realism element into it.
Yes.
I love it. I eat that shit up every time.
I didn't mention a lot of the magic in this one because there's a lot more than just the fairy guy doing some magic. I just didn't want to spoil it, but there's something about Effie that's magical.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Not so powerless.
Exactly. Not so powerless.
Well, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm definitely gonna pick that one up. The nice thing that I really like about our challenge that we have for the year is you don't have to read any of them in a particular order. Obviously our book of the month, you read the month that it is the book of the month. But for our overarching challenge where you can pick your own books to fill that little challenge role.
The 23 for 2023.
Yeah, our 23 for 2023 challenge. You can just add whatever you want and read it kind of at your leisure and check those boxes off and kind of see what other people are reading, and it's really fun. I really like it.
Yeah, I do too. Speaking of challenges, Lady sent me like a fun idea for a game that I want us to do really quick. Basically, what you do is you go to the person's Goodreads or Storygraph and you look at a book that they have read, and they have to tell you in a brief summary what happens in it from memory. And I thought that sounded so fun. I'm someone who tends to forget books as soon as I put them down.
Me too. It's like, all right, moving on.
Yeah, so I thought this would be fun. So do you want to do me, Caitlin?
Sure, I'll do you.
Okay, and then I'll do B, and then B, you can do Lady, and then Lady can do Caitlin.
Perfect.
Okie dokie.
Okay, I can go first.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Ruh-roh.
so B, I picked The Singles Table by Sara Desai.
Okay, so the singles table was something that was an option for Warren Page Library's romance like last year, and it didn't get picked. And hilariously, the one that did get picked, no one liked. I finished it though, but like everyone DNF'd it. But anyway, so the singles table is basically, I want to say it's like California or LA or something. But essentially, you have two characters, and it's mostly set with like Desi culture, and especially like wedding season. It's a romance. You have a female lead character who is like the wild and like extroverted and just like a wild child, and who's constantly getting pressure from the aunties to get into a serious relationship and get married. And then the male lead character is like the serious, owns a security firm, like everything is orderly and organized. And so it's a fairly cute, although it like gets off to like a weird bumpy start, but it's a fairly cute story romance about these two characters, and like the extrovert kind of wild child, a female lead, is able to kind of bring some joy out of the male lead, who has like for a number of reasons like lives a very strict and shut down life to like maintain control. The premise of it is that during the wedding season, they're always set at the singles table because they're not really attached in a serious relationship. And it was pretty good.
I know nothing about this book, so that's probably all right. It sounds right.
I've read another book in that series, and it sounds all right with me.
All right. So I will now ask Lady.
Oh no. I'm so scared.
So I went to your Storygraph, and I don't remember how I got there, but it said that you had like 210 things that you've read. It let me choose the feature of earliest read instead of latest read. And so I started with your earliest read and scrolled. Can you tell me about this book that's called Wicked Like a Wildfire?
No! I fucking refuse to talk about this book. Okay, this book is so bad.
I feel accomplished.
I don't remember the protagonist's name. She has a sister. Her name is Iris. They're both witches. I think it's not clear at first that they're witches, but they have powers. Okay, Iris's power is with music, and the main character's power has to do with fractals?
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay.
Something happens. They realize that they're actually part of a lineage of witches that is part of a coven, where all of these women have powers that are all meant to impress men.
Great.
They're all powers that are like showy in some way so that they can impress men, and something, they're always twins, and they have to kill one of the two twins because one of them has to go in hell
What?
to be the wife of whatever death is in that universe.
What?
Ugh.
What on earth?
Caitlin, you'll be more upset that the first part of the summary says fans of Holly Black and Leigh Bardugo will be bewitched.
No.
I'm bewitched by a lot of things, but it's not in a good way.
I'm offended for both of those authors.
I read this book, and then for my reading challenge the next year, I had a thing that was give a book a second chance. So I read the second book in this series, and I hated it just as much.
You
I
trooper.
am so delighted that I found the one
You
book
found the one
that
book.
I found the book that you loathed.
I was wrong. The main character is named Iris. Her sister is named Lena.
We got something right.
I'm looking at my Goodreads review for this book. My review on Goodreads says, for a book written in first person, it was really hard to relate to Iris. For the whole book, it felt like she was manipulated by everyone, but I was supposed to believe that she was strong and independent.
Ugh.
Anyway, I did not like that book. Caitlin, the book I found in your Goodreads is The Savage and the Swan by Ella Fields.
Oh, okay. So The Savage and the Swan is kind of a like retelling of The Swan Princess, which I don't know if you're familiar with either the movie or just like the fairy tale in general. But it is focused on this girl, I can't remember her name, I think it's Briar. She lives in like a fae kingdom. She's a princess, and her country has been warring with this other like fae country for a while, and to get reinforcements, her parents basically sell her into marriage to a human. He turns out to be a shithead, and she gets kidnapped by the leader of the opposing fae. They turn out to be mates, and there's a big romance happening there. All the while, she obviously hates him. His feelings are genuine, and they end up getting married, but the caveat of her getting married to him is that she wants to get married in her, like, castle, like, with her mother, and, her mother doesn't believe that either one of them have genuine feelings for each other, so she tries to ambush Dade and kill him. That's the mate. It doesn't work because the daughter traps herself in with him when he gets trapped, and they basically, it's like about forgiveness and moving on and blah, blah, blah. It was alright. The weirdest thing for me with that book is, for one thing, it was a dual point of view book, which I don't have a problem with, but it did not start being dual point of view until like 15% of the way into the book.
Yeah.
Which is way too much.
Yeah, because you get settled with.
Yeah, you get settled with the one character. And the reason that it was, like, done that way, I think, is because, so Dade, who is the leader of the rival fae people, he disguises himself as, like, a common foot soldier, and he keeps going back to see her when she, like, sneaks out of the castle. He's, like, training her to fight, basically. And I think, like, the author didn't want to reveal that he was who he was before the kidnapping, but, like, there's so many ways that you could do that. Like, he could just be, like, talking ambiguously about, like, not wanting her to know who he really is, and, like, talking about how, like, he doesn't understand their connection or something like that, you know? Like, there's other ways to do that other than just, like, randomly starting a POV a quarter of the way in. And the other thing I really didn't like about this book is there is a very important piece of exposition about, like, where the war started and, like, what the true story is of, like, how these two factions of, like, fae kingdoms came to be fighting with one another. And the only way that it is told to us, the audience, is through a flashback in one of Dade's chapters where he is, like, remembering the day that it happened. And it is never told to, I think her name is Briar. It might be Opal. I really can't remember. It's something like that. Very fantasy-esque. But it's never told to her on page. It's just, like, assumed that she learned that. And it's so weird. It's such a weird way to do that.
Yeah, that's strange.
Yeah. It is, it's not bad. It's pretty good. And she does write really good sex scenes. But,
Ooh.
yeah. I wouldn't recommend it, but I also wouldn't not recommend it.
Okay.
Like, there's other books to read, but it's alright. Alright, Kristen.
I'm ready.
The book that I have for you, and considering how much we talk about books, this is saying something, I have never heard you mention this book to me or anyone else,
Okay.
is Ghosts of the Forbidden.
Oh, okay. This book was actually, it wasn't bad. I actually got it as like a arc through NetGalley. And so this book is about this woman goes to this town, and I can't remember why she's going there because I have the worst memory ever. I think she's like writing a book, or she's there for like a summit, or it's something to do with that. And she's staying in this old house, and it's like a really old mansion. The whole thing revolves around like reincarnated lovers. And so she is staying in like a guest house for this mansion, and she keeps seeing this man that she feels like she knows, but she can't, like, she's never met him before, but she just like feels like this connection to him that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And so she ends up finding out like later on that there was a couple that used to live in this guest house and both of them had died. But before they had passed away, they had said, like, they would never forget each other, blah, 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 blah. You know how that stuff goes. And so, like, they have come back as reincarnated lovers and have found each other again. It's going to be a series. I don't think it's been finished yet. I mean, the book wasn't bad. It was just that, like, the dialogue was, like, really clunky and awkward, and, like, the characters, like, didn't really act, like, normal sometimes. Like, the main character's name is Lillian, and so when she finds out that she's got, like, a past lover from the 1800s that she found, like, she's just kind of like, oh, that's cool. Like, she doesn't act normal about it in a way that, like, a normal person would. And also, like, her reincarnated lover doesn't come into the book until, like, over 50% of the way through.
What?
Yeah, so it was like, I kept wondering where the book was going, because I was like, what's the point of this story gonna be? Like, she's just at this house, like, doing this sort of thing, and it's just like, what's the point of this? And then finally he comes in and the story finally takes off, like, 50% of the way through. So, but yeah, like I said, I got it as an arc, and it was fine. I think this might have been one of her first books, the author. I don't know. It was fine. It wasn't great, but it wasn't bad.
I'm kind of surprised by how good we are at these.
I know.
The description of these books.
I know, right?
Yeah, actually.
We've been here, y'all listening. We've been here doing this for like 4 hours at this point.
Yeah. I gotta go to bed.
Yeah, we gotta go to bed.
We're all old.
Yes. So we really appreciate everybody listening, and we thank you so much for all the support you've shown us. But we are getting the hell out of here.
We love you.
We do. So our next episode is going to come out February the 28th. In the meantime, you can find us at Red in the Dark Pod on Instagram and Tumblr. Our email is redinthedarkpod@gmail.com if you want to ask a question about any of the books we discussed in this episode. We also have a book club. You can find us at Warm Page Library on Instagram and Tumblr, which will have details on how to join our Discord. Finally, we're hosting some challenges on Storygraph through the book club, which you can find by searching Warm Page Library's Book of the Month and Warm Page Library's 23 for 2023 in the challenges section of the app. During this episode, we talked about quite a few books. The book Kristen talked about was Stalking Jack the Ripper by Kerri Maniscalco. Lady's book was 10,000 Stitches by Olivia Atwater. We also talked about Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas, Codex Alera by Jim Butcher, the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon, The Modern Fairytales by Holly Black, The Folk of the Air by Holly Black, The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, Kingdom of the Wicked by Kerri Maniscalco, Stalking Jack the Ripper series by Kerri Maniscalco, all of the Regency Fairytales series by Olivia Atwater, the Captive Prince series by C.S. Pacat, and during our game, we talked about The Singles Table by Sara Desai, Wicked Like a Wildfire by Lana Popovic, The Savage and the Swan by Ella Fields, and Ghosts of the Forbidden by Leanna Renee Hyper. Keep reading, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.